The universe thought humanity was soft, a fragile species hiding behind diplomacy and trade agreements. When the orbital bombardment cracked the crust of Mining Station Delta, the galaxy expected a surrender. Instead, a dead man's switch was flipped. 42 minutes later, an empire ceased to exist. The atmospheric scrubber in Sector 4 possessed a specific, high-pitched whine that Arthur Hayes felt primarily in his molars. It wasn't a sound you heard so much as a vibration you endured, a constant, abrasive reminder that he was breathing recycled air on a rock that didn't care if he lived or died. Station Delta was a pimple of human engineering on the face of a barren, silicate-rich asteroid. Its primary export was raw ore, its secondary export was depression. Arthur sat in the communications hub, a cramped, dimly lit room that smelled perpetually of ozone, old sweat, and the sharp, chemical tang of scorched insulation. He was 46 years old, 30 pounds overweight, and possessed a cynicism so deeply ingrained it functioned as a secondary immune system. He brought a chipped ceramic mug to his lips. The synthcaf tasted like battery acid mixed with burnt dirt. He swallowed it anyway. It was hot, and on Delta, warmth was a premium commodity. Arthur's fingers, stained yellow from cheap tobacco substitutes, danced lazily across the pitted plastic keys of his console. The telemetry data was a monotonous crawl of green numbers against a black screen. Sector 7 reporting normal pressure. Sector 9 reporting a jammed drill head. Miller down in engineering was complaining over the local channel about a leaky coupling. Normalcy. A suffocating, utterly mundane normalcy. Then the gravity generators stuttered. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, just a momentary dip. Arthur felt his stomach float toward his ribcage for a fraction of a second before slamming back down. His coffee spilled, the dark liquid splashing across the scuffed metal desk and dripping onto his trousers. "Damn it, Miller," Arthur muttered, grabbing a heavily stained rag from a drawer. "Watch the dampeners." He reached for the comm switch, but his hand never made it. The first kinetic strike didn't make a sound. There was no atmosphere outside to carry the acoustic wave. Instead, the station simply shoved violently to the left. Arthur was thrown from his chair, his shoulder hitting the grated steel floor with a wet crunch that made him bite his own tongue. A sharp metallic taste flooded his mouth. Then came the noise. The atmosphere inside the station carried the agonizing scream of tearing metal, a low, guttural roar that vibrated up through the floorboards and rattled his skull. The overhead lights flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the sickly crimson glow of the emergency strips. Arthur lay there gasping. He didn't jump up. He didn't grab the emergency sidearm locked in the wall safe. He curled into a fetal position, his hands clamped over his ears, and squeezed his eyes shut. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. Asteroid strike, he thought, his mind desperately grasping for a rational explanation. Just a rogue rock. We're fine. The bulkheads will hold. Another impact. This one was closer. The ceiling buckled inward, groaning under immense pressure. Fine. Grey dust rained down, coating Arthur's face. It smelled like sulphur and crushed stone. He opened his eyes, blinking through the stinging grit. The telemetry monitors on his desk were going insane. The green crawl was gone, replaced by a frantic cascade of red warnings. Hull breach in Sector 2, atmosphere venting in Sector 3, total catastrophic failure in Sector 5. Sector 5 was the barracks. 70 people asleep in their bunks. Gone. Just like that. Arthur's breath came in short, jagged gasps. He scrambled backward, his boots slipping on his own spilled coffee, until his back hit the cold metal of the server rack. He was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in his chest and radiated outward to his fingertips. He felt a warm dampness spreading in his trousers and realized, with a numb sort of detachment, that he had pissed himself. "Command!" A voice crackled over the emergency radio, distorted by static. It was Miller. He sounded wet. "Command, we are under attack. Repeat, we are—" The transmission was cut short by a sound Arthur had never heard outside of archived war footage. the searing, high-frequency hiss of plasma cutting through reinforced durasteel. Not an asteroid. An attack. Arthur swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He forced his hands to uncurl from his head, forced himself to drag his heavy, terrified body up the side of the server rack. He peered over the edge of the desk at the monitors. Sensors picked up a swarm of contacts in the black space above the asteroid. Sleek, jagged silhouettes. Kalan interceptors, the Kalan hegemony, an expansionist empire that humanity had been trying to negotiate with for 3 tense fruitless years. They'd grown tired of talking. They had decided to take Delta. Arthur stared at the blinking red lights representing the boarding pods attaching to the station's hull like iron ticks. He wasn't a soldier. He was a glorified ET guy who routed emails and monitored atmospheric gauges. He didn't want to die. The overwhelming, pathetic urge to survive drowned out any sense of duty or heroism. He wanted his mother. He wanted to be anywhere but this freezing, dying rock. He looked at the main communications terminal. Above the keyboard, under a layer of smudge and grime, was a small physical switch encased in clear plasglass. The contingency protocol. The station was bleeding out. Arthur could hear it. The distant, shrieking wind of atmosphere being sucked into the vacuum of space echoed through the ventilation shafts. It was a mournful, hollow sound punctuated by the heavy rhythmic thuds of breaching charges. They were inside. Arthur dragged himself into the command chair. His shoulder screamed in protest, a sharp, stabbing pain that made his vision swim. He ignored it. His focus narrowed entirely to the screens in front of him. He pulled up the internal security feeds. Camera 4, Hallway C. 3 station guards, clad in lightweight security armor meant for breaking up bar fights, were kneeling behind a barricade of overturned cargo crates. Their faces were pale, slick with sweat. They were holding outdated kinetic rifles, their hands trembling visibly. The heavy blast door at the end of the corridor glowed cherry red in the center. The metal bubbled, turning to slag, and then blew inward with a deafening concussive pop that destroyed the camera's audio feed. Through the thick, roiling smoke stepped the Kalan. They were massive, standing nearly 7 feet tall, encased in dull, geometric armor that absorbed the emergency lighting. They moved with a predatory, terrifying fluidity. No hesitation. No wasted motion. The human guards opened fire. Muzzle flashes strobed in the smoky corridor. The kinetic rounds sparked and pinged harmlessly off the Kalan shielding. The lead alien didn't even flinch. It simply raised a heavy, boxy weapon. A flash of violet light blinded the camera for a split second. When the feed adjusted, the barricade was gone. 2 of the guards were reduced to charred, smoking meat. Their armor melted into their flesh. The 3rd was crawling away, leaving a thick smear of blood on the grated floor. The Kalan stepped forward, its heavy boot pinning the guard's leg. Another flash of violet. The crawling stopped. Arthur turned away and vomited. It was a violent, wrenching heave that emptied his stomach onto the floor beside the console. The smell of acidic synth-calf and fear filled the small room, masking the ozone. He wiped his mouth with the back of a trembling hand, his chest heaving. They're coming here, he realized. The comms hub was the tactical center of the station. It was standard doctrine to secure communications to prevent a distress signal. He looked back at the glass-encased switch. During his orientation 5 years ago, a board military liaison had explained the Black Sky Protocol. Delta was a border outpost, insignificant in resources but strategically positioned on the edge of Kalan space. It was a tripwire. If the station falls, the liaison had said, stifling a yawn, you flip this. It bypasses local arrays and sends a tight beam burst straight to Earth Command via the subspace relays. It tells them diplomacy failed. Arthur flipped the plastic casing up. His fingers were slick with sweat and grime. He hesitated. He had read the fine print in his contract, the rumours on the DeepNet boards. Black Sky wasn't just a distress beacon, it was a targeting lock. It handed over the outpost telemetry and the enemy's spatial coordinates directly to the automated strategic defence network. He didn't know what the network would do. He didn't care. He just wanted someone to make the monsters stop. Heavy metallic footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the comms hub, the clank of armoured boots on metal grating. Slow, deliberate. They knew there was nowhere to run. Arthur slammed his hand down on the switch. The console lit up with a brilliant, blinding white light. A prompt appeared on the screen, written in stark mechanical block letters. Directive 73, Black Sky, initiated, awaiting biometric authorization. A small glass panel slid open on the desk. The footsteps outside stopped. The mechanical hum of the comms hub door lock began to cycle. They were overriding the keypad. Arthur jammed his right hand onto the scanner. The glass was cold. Scanning! The door hissed, the heavy metal slab sliding open an inch. A crowbar-like instrument jammed into the gap, prying it wider with a sickening screech of distressed metal. Authorization accepted. Hayes, A. Tech Officer 4. Transmitting package. A heavy, gauntleted hand gripped the edge of the door. Arthur could smell them now, a distinct odour like wet ash and rotting copper. Package sent. May God have mercy on our enemies. The screen went black. The door was violently ripped off its track, crashing to the floor. 2 Kaelan warriors stepped into the small room. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Their armour was scarred and pitted, bearing the marks of 100 campaigns. The visor of the lead warrior was a smooth, opaque black glass that reflected Arthur's terrified, sweat-drenched face. Arthur threw his hands up, pressing his back against the cold monitors. "I surrender," he screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I'm unarmed. Please." The lead Kaelan slowly lowered its violet glowing weapon. It didn't shoot. Instead, it let out a low, clicking sound that the translator implant behind Arthur's ear struggled to process. "Target secured," the mechanical voice whispered in Arthur's head. "Communications disabled." The Kaelan stepped forward, grabbing Arthur by the collar of his jumpsuit and lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Arthur's boots dangled inches from the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the violet flash, waiting for the searing heat. Instead, the Kaelan simply held him there, turning its massive helmeted head toward the dead console. The alien was breathing heavily, a wet, rasping sound. Time seemed to stretch. A second felt like an hour. Arthur hung there, suspended by a monster, smelling the slaughter of his colleagues on its armour, waiting for an end that refused to come. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. The station groaned around them, the metal cooling and shifting in the vacuum. The Kaelan warrior held Arthur with the casual indifference of a man holding a stray dog by the scruff. Then, the Kaelan's internal comms unit burst into life. It wasn't a standard military transmission. Even through the heavy armour, Arthur could hear the sheer, unadulterated panic in the alien voice screaming over the channel. The sound was raw, shrill, and entirely stripped of the disciplined, guttural cadence the Kaelan usually possessed. The warrior holding Arthur stiffened. Its grip loosened just a fraction. Arthur's translator implant kicked in, struggling to pass the chaotic, overlapping shouts, bleeding from the alien's earpiece. "See your..." "Sky is burning." "Command unresponsive." "Fleet is..." "Annihilation. It's gone. By the ancestors. It's..." The Kaelan dropped Arthur. Arthur hit the metal floor hard, his bad shoulder screaming again, but he didn't cry out. He scrambled backward like a crab, pressing himself into the darkest corner of the room, panting heavily. He watched the 2 towering aliens. The rigid, predatory confidence was gone. They stood frozen, their heavy, boxed weapons lowering until the barrels pointed uselessly at the floorboards. The lead warrior reached up a trembling, armoured hand and touched the side of its helmet, as if trying to press the earpiece closer. "Repeat Homeworld command, this is Strike Team." The warrior spoke into its mic, its voice tight. "Repeat, "We are not receiving." Only static answered. The hissing, empty sound of dead space. Suddenly the dead monitors in the comms hub flared back to life. They didn't show local telemetry. They didn't show the Kalen fleet outside. Every single screen, from the main tactical display down to Arthur's tiny auxiliary monitor, was overridden. A stark white emblem appeared against the black background. The crest of the United Nations Earth Command. A voice echoed from the room's tinny overhead speakers. It wasn't human. It was a synthesized, algorithmic voice, perfectly level, devoid of any anger, sadness, or triumph. It was the voice of cold, calculated mathematics. "Attention Kalen hegemony forces," the voice stated. "This is an automated broadcast from the Terran Defense Directorate." The two Kalen warriors slowly turned toward the main screen, seemingly paralyzed. At 0400 hours standard Earth time, your forces initiated an unprovoked attack on Terran Outpost Delta, resulting in the loss of 42 human lives. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the failing heating systems. 42. The system had already counted the dead. Under the provisions of the Black Sky Doctrine, this aggression was classified as an existential threat to Terran sovereignty. The voice continued smoothly. A localized proportionate response was deemed insufficient to guarantee future security. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the monitors and Arthur's ragged breathing. At 0402 hours, the automated strategic defense array fired a cluster of 6 relativistic kinetic kill vehicles. They were accelerated to 99.9% the speed of light. Target, Kalen Prime. Arthur stopped breathing. Relativistic kill vehicles, weapons of mass extinction. Humanity had sworn to the Galactic Council they didn't possess them. They were theoretically impossible to track, impossible to stop. A solid tungsten rod hitting a planet at the speed of light wouldn't just crater a city. It would shatter the tectonic plates, boil the oceans in seconds and peel the atmosphere away like the skin of an apple. At 0442 hours, the cold voice stated, impact was confirmed. Kalen Prime has been successfully sterilized. Estimated casualty count, 8.4 billion. The Kalen hegemony is no longer recognized as an active political or military entity. Arthur stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the numbers. 8 billion. 8 billion. Over a mining rock, over 42 terrified miners and a washed-up comms officer, the voice concluded, any remaining Kalen vessels are advised to surrender to the nearest Terran authority. Hostile actions will result in the immediate sterilization of all known colony worlds. Have a pleasant day. The screens blinked back to the United Nations crest. Arthur looked at the Kalen warriors. They hadn't moved. The lead warrior slowly fell to its knees. The heavy armor clanged against the deck. It didn't reach for its weapon. It didn't try to finish Arthur off. It just stared at the floor, a low keening sound escaping its helmet, a sound of absolute devastating grief. Arthur sat in his puddle of spilled synth-calf and urine. He looked down at his own trembling hands, the hands that had swiped the biometric scanner, the hands that had sent the package. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel the righteous, triumphant vengeance of a species defending its own. He felt a deep, sickening nausea curl in his gut. He looked at the alien weeping on the floor in front of him, a monster broken by a much, much larger monster. Humanity wasn't soft. Humanity didn't hide behind diplomacy because they were weak. They hid behind diplomacy because they knew exactly what they were capable of when the talking stopped. Arthur pressed his palms into his eyes, but the darkness offered no comfort. He was alive, but the weight of 8 billion ghosts was already settling heavily onto his tired shoulders. The temperature inside the comms hub was dropping. Fast. With the main reactor crippled and sectors 3 and 5 venting atmosphere into the void, the life support systems had gone into a desperate preservation mode, shutting off heat to non-essential areas. Arthur's breath began to plume in the dim, red-lit air. The wetness on his trousers had gone from uncomfortably warm to a biting, clammy cold that made his legs ache. He pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his good arm around them, trying to stop his teeth from clicking together. His left shoulder throbbed with a dull, heavy rhythm, a physical anchor to the surreal nightmare unfolding around him. The two Kaelan warriors remained exactly where they were. The lead alien, the one who had lifted Arthur by the throat, was still on its knees. It hadn't made another sound since that singular, wretched keen. Its massive, armoured hands rested flat on the grated floor. The second warrior stood near the ruined doorway, leaning heavily against the buckled doorframe. Its weapon had slipped from its grasp, clattering uselessly against the metal deck. Arthur watched them with a detached, freezing numbness. He expected them to turn on him. He expected the kneeling one to stand up, draw a sidearm and vaporize his head in a fit of rage. It would have been fair. He had just annihilated their entire civilization. He had murdered their families, their children, their history, everything they had ever built or loved, all by pressing a greasy thumb against a piece of glass. But the anger never came. Only a profound, suffocating paralysis. Slowly, the kneeling Kaelan reached up to the collar of its armour. With a sharp hiss of releasing pressure seals, it gripped the heavy black helmet and pulled it free. Arthur held his breath. He had never seen a Kaelan without armour. The propaganda vids back on Earth usually depicted them as faceless, towering monoliths of war. The alien let the helmet roll from its fingers. It clunked against the desk. The creature's face was vaguely mammalian, covered in short, coarse grey hair. It had a flattened nasal ridge and 4 deeply set amber eyes. Right now, those eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, staring unblinkingly at the UN crest still glowing on the monitors. Thick, dark fluid, tears, or the Kaelan equivalent, streaked down its ash-dusted fur, matting it to its cheekbones. It looked old. It looked exhausted. It looked like a broken parent who had just received the worst news in the universe. Arthur felt his stomach twist, threatening to empty again, but there was nothing left to throw up. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his forehead against his knees. "I didn't know," he chanted in his head, a pathetic, repetitive mantra. "I didn't know. I just wanted them to stop cutting the door." "Hey," Arthur croaked. His voice sounded like sandpaper grating on rust. The alien didn't move. It didn't register the sound. "Hey," Arthur said again, a little louder. He slowly uncurled, wincing as a sharp spike of pain shot through his collarbone. He gestured weakly toward a heavy grey box mounted on the wall near the alien. "The manual override, for the thermal vents. You can turn it to bypass, or we'll freeze." The Kaelan blinked slowly, its 4 eyes turning to look at Arthur. There was no comprehension, just a vast empty void where a soul used to be. Arthur swallowed hard. He slowly pushed himself up with his right hand, his boots slipping slightly on the freezing puddle of his own vomit. He kept his hands open, palms facing outward, and shuffled toward the wall. The second Kaelan by the door didn't even track his movement. Arthur reached the grey box. His fingers were stiff and pale, devoid of blood. He fumbled with the metal latch, popping it open, and yanked the heavy red lever downward. The vents above them groaned, and a weak, lukewarm current of air began to push out, carrying the smell of burning dust. He slid down the wall, ending up sitting only a few feet away from the kneeling Kaelan. They sat there in the weak current of warm air, a terrified IT tech and a soldier without a home, listening to the station die around them. 30 minutes passed. The metallic groaning of the hull grew louder, sounding like a dying whale trapped under ice. The emergency lighting flickered, threatening to plunge them into total darkness. Then Arthur felt a vibration, not the violent shudder of an impact, but a deep rhythmic thrumming that resonated through the floor plates. The second Kaelan by the door finally moved. It slowly turned its head toward the corridor, its amber eyes narrowing. Heavy boots, not Kaelan boots. These steps were faster, lighter, perfectly synchronized. Tactical spacing. Arthur tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. "Wait," he whispered, though he didn't know who he was talking to. 3 figures materialized in the smoking ruin of the doorway. They wore sleek, matte black vacuum armor, devoid of any insignia or unit markings. Their visors were mirrored, reflecting the dim red emergency lights. They moved with a predatory silence that made the Kalan warriors look clumsy. Earth Command, the rapid response teams. The lead soldier swept the room with the barrel of a compact suppressed kinetic rifle. The weapon locked onto the standing Kalan by the door. "Target acquired," a clipped synthetic voice filtered through the soldier's external speakers. Thwip thwip. 2 suppressed rounds punched through the Kalan's armor joints. The alien didn't even have time to reach for its weapon. It folded instantly, hitting the deck with a heavy hollow thud, dark blue blood pooling rapidly around its torso. "No!" Arthur screamed, his voice cracking. He scrambled forward on his knees. "Stop! They aren't fighting! They've stopped fighting!" The lead soldier ignored him entirely. The barrel swung smoothly to the kneeling Kalan. The alien didn't look at the soldier. It didn't look at the gun. It just kept staring at the monitors, at the UN crest. "Wait, please!" Arthur grabbed at the air, begging. "Their planet is gone. They surrender. They—" Thwip. A single round took the Kalan in the back of the head. The heavy skull jerked forward, snapping the neck, and the alien collapsed face first onto the deck, its grey fur instantly matted with gore. The room went dead silent, save for the weak hiss of the thermal vent. The lead soldier lowered his rifle and walked over to Arthur. The mirrored visor reflected Arthur's pale, tear-streaked face. The soldier reached down, grabbed Arthur by the collar of his jumpsuit, exactly as the Kalan had done an hour ago, and hauled him roughly to his feet. "Arthur Hayes?" the soldier asked. The voice was devoid of any emotion. It sounded just like the automated broadcast. Arthur stared at the dead alien on the floor. The pool of blue blood was creeping toward his boots. He nodded numbly. "Package delivery confirmed. You're being extracted. Move." The light in the medical bay of the UNS Magellan was aggressive. It wasn't just bright. It was a clinical shadow-erasing white that scraped against the inside of Arthur's retinas. He sat on the edge of a brushed steel examination table, shivering uncontrollably. A thick woven thermal blanket, heavy and suffocating, draped over his slumped shoulders. It smelled of industrial laundry detergent and static. Underneath it, his skin felt raw. The automated decontamination scrubbers had stripped away the sweat, the grime, and the dust of Station Delta, but they couldn't scrub away the phantom smell trapped in his sinuses. Wet ash, copper, ruptured intestines. Every time Arthur inhaled, it caught in the back of his throat, making his stomach heave. A medical drone, no larger than a fist, hovered near his temple. It emitted a high-frequency whine that vibrated against his teeth, much like the atmospheric scrubbers on Delta, only sharper. A needle-thin appendage dabbed dermal glue onto a jagged laceration above his eyebrow. The chemical bite stung, sending a hot flare of pain through his skull, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't. His body felt completely disconnected, a hollow meat sack operated by distant, failing impulses. His left arm was immobilized in a rigid, expanding foam sling that locked his shoulder joint in place. The ache was a dull, heavy pulse synced to his erratic heartbeat. He stared blankly at his feet. They'd given him standard-issue ship slippers. His actual boots, soaked in spilled synth-calf urine and the dark blue blood of a murdered father, were gone. Incinerated, probably. The heavy, soundproof bulkhead door slid open with a soft, pressurized hiss. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing the matte black tactical armor of the extraction teams, nor the utilitarian jumpsuits of the ship's engineering crew. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey fleet uniform. The fabric was crisp, the creases razor-sharp. He looked to be in his late 50s, his silver hair cropped tight to a perfectly symmetrical skull. Deep, permanent grooves framed his mouth, the kind of lines etched by decades of reviewing casualty reports in climate-controlled rooms. He carried a slim data tablet. What hit Arthur first was the smell. Beneath the sterile ozone of the medbay, the man carried the scent of rich, dark roast coffee and expensive sandalwood shaving soap. It was an offensive, luxurious smell. It belonged to a world of manicured lawns and blue skies, light years away from the freezing dark of the rim. "Mr. Hayes," Band said. His voice was a baritone purr, smooth and practiced. "I am Captain Thomas Wright, Fleet Intelligence." Wright stepped closer, stopping exactly 2 feet from the examination table. He didn't offer his hand. Arthur just looked at the man's shoes. They were black leather, polished to a mirror finish. Not a speck of dust on them. "The automated diagnostics indicate your collarbone is fractured but stable," Wright continued, his tone entirely conversational. "The foam cast will dissolve in 72 hours. No permanent nerve damage." Arthur forced his dry tongue over cracked lips. "Water." Wright paused, tapping the edge of his tablet. "Excuse me?" "I need water." Wright's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, but he gestured to a small dispenser set into the bulkhead. The medical drone zipped away, returning seconds later with a flimsy paper cup of tepid water. Arthur took it with his good hand. His fingers trembled so violently that half the liquid sloshed over the rim, soaking into his grey hospital scrubs. He drank the rest in one desperate, choking gulp. It tasted like recycled plastic. "I know this has been a profoundly traumatic cycle for you, Arthur," Wright said, his voice lowering a fraction, attempting an empathetic register that completely failed to reach his eyes. "But protocol requires a debriefing while the events are fresh. For the official record." Arthur crushed the wet paper cup in his fist. "The record." "Yes. Simply answer the prompts." Wright tapped the glass of his tablet. "Can you confirm that you initiated the Black Sky contingency at 0402 hours station time?" "Yes." The word sounded like a dying breath. "Can you confirm that at the time of activation, Station Delta was sustaining catastrophic structural damage and you were under direct lethal threat from hostile boarding forces?" Arthur squeezed his eyes shut. He saw the flash of violet plasma. He heard the wet crunch of the security guards dying in the corridor. "They were cutting the door. They melted Henderson. I didn't have a gun. I just hit the switch." Wright nodded slowly, his face a mask of bureaucratic sympathy. "Self-defense. The installation was compromised. You acted exactly according to your operational parameters. You did what you were trained to do." A sudden, jagged spike of anger cut through the heavy blanket of Arthur's shock. It wasn't a heroic, burning rage. It was an ugly, desperate thing born of guilt and profound nausea. He pushed himself upright, the sudden movement sending a sickening jolt through his shattered shoulder. "I pressed a button to call Earth Command," Arthur said, his voice cracking, spiraling up in pitch. "I pressed it so someone would come and stop them from killing me. I didn't press a button to murder 8 billion people, Captain. I didn't know the network was going to do that. I didn't know!" Wright's polite, empathetic mask slipped slightly, revealing the cold, calculating machinery beneath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't back away. Arthur, the Kaelan hegemony was mobilizing a vanguard fleet. Fleet Intelligence confirmed it 3 months ago. They were preparing a massive, unannounced incursion into the Orion Arm. Within 6 weeks, they would have bypassed our outer pickets and commenced orbital bombardment on 6 human colony worlds. Billions of our own citizens were going to burn. "So we just wiped them out," Arthur spat, spittle flying from his lips, landing on the immaculate steel table. "All of them, the civilians, the kids, because of what they might have done. Because of what they were going to do," Wright corrected, his tone icing over. "We didn't strike first, Mr. Hayes. They attacked Delta. They breached sovereign human territory and massacred 42 UN citizens in cold blood. They initiated the war. The Black Sky Protocol is a deterrent mechanism. A deterrent only functions if the enemy fundamentally believes you have the psychological stomach to use it." But they didn't know," Arthur shouted. The medical drone retreated toward the ceiling, its sensors agitated by his vocal spikes. "They didn't know we had relativistic weapons. If they knew a single kinetic rod could crack their homeworld in half, they never would have touched Delta." Wright slowly lowered the tablet. He looked at Arthur for a long, quiet moment. The silence in the bright room became a physical weight, pressing down heavily on Arthur's chest. "You're entirely correct," Wright said softly. "They didn't know." Arthur's breath hitched. He stared at the polished officer, his tired brain struggling to process the sheer, terrifying calm of that admission. If we had publicly announced the existence of the RKV arrays, Wright continued, his voice dropping to a conversational murmur, the Galactic Council would have immediately sanctioned Earth. The Kalan would have dispersed their populations, decentralized their command structure across 20 star systems, and initiated a protracted century-long war of attrition. A war humanity would mathematically lose. We needed to eliminate the threat entirely, in a single, unanswerable stroke. Wright took a slow step forward, his polished shoes utterly silent on the antimicrobial flooring. But human ethics are a complicated, fragile thing, Arthur. The Council, and our own civilian populace, dictate that we cannot launch an unprovoked strike of that magnitude. We needed a casus belli, an act of war so egregious, so undeniable, that the rest of the galaxy would have no choice but to accept our retaliation as a regrettable necessity of self-defense. We needed them to attack a target that was undeniably sovereign territory. Arthur felt his stomach hollow out. The cold, twisting snake in his gut turned into a block of lead. Delta. A border station, Wright confirmed, nodding slightly. Historically insignificant, strategically irrelevant, but legally a piece of Earth. We reduced your garrison size 6 months ago. We pulled the heavy defensive batteries under the guise of maintenance. We made it look like a vulnerability. We made it irresistible bait. You let them kill us, Arthur whispered. The anger evaporated, leaving nothing but a profound, crushing emptiness. You let Miller die. You let them vent Sector 5, just so you could have your excuse. 42 casualties is a tragic but statistically acceptable loss to ensure the continued survival of our species, Wright said flatly. The mask was completely gone now. He was the architect of a genocide, and he was perfectly at peace with the ledger. You were the fail-safe, Arthur. We couldn't risk placing a hardened Marine in that comms chair. A soldier might have tried to fight to the last man. A hero might have overloaded the station's reactor core to take the boarding party with them, destroying the array before the signal could be sent. We needed an ordinary frightened man, a man who would just panic and press the button. Arthur looked down at his right hand. The skin was pale, the nails bitten to the quick. The hand that had swiped the scanner. The hand that had slaughtered a species. It looked like a stranger's hand. You will be given a full medical discharge with honours, Wright said, turning on his heel toward the door. A highly generous pension. A quiet life on a core world of your choosing. Your records will be sealed under the Official Secrets Act. You will never speak of the specifics of the Black Sky Protocol or the true nature of the Kalan attack. If you do, you will be tried for treason and quietly disappeared. As the heavy hydraulic door hissed open, Wright paused, looking back over his shoulder. You saved humanity today, Mr. Hayes. Try to find some comfort in that. The door slid shut, locking with a heavy final clunk. Arthur was alone again. He stood up, his legs shaking, dragging the heavy blanket with him as he walked over to the small viewport set into the far wall. Outside, the endless, indifferent black of space stretched out, speckled with the cold, distant light of 1 billion stars. Somewhere out there, a star system was burning. A planet had been cracked open, its atmosphere violently stripped away, its oceans boiled into radioactive steam. 8 billion voices silenced in a fraction of a second, all because one terrified man sitting in the dark wanted to live. Arthur rested his forehead against the cold reinforced glass. The reflection staring back at him was pale, battered, and hollowed out. Humanity hadn't survived because they were braver, or stronger, or more resilient. They survived because they were the apex predators of the void. They were the monsters hiding in the dark, willing to sacrifice their own flesh and blood just to sharpen the blade of the guillotine. Arthur closed his eyes, trapped forever with the wet smell of ash, the humming of the ship, and the suffocating weight of 8 billion ghosts. That's the chilling reality of Earth's defense protocols. If this story made you question who the real monsters are in the vastness of space, smash that like button and subscribe for more deep, emotional sci-fi narratives. What would you do in Arthur's shoes? Could you live with the weight of 8 billion ghosts? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next transmission.